We're ready to get started, Hugh. Okay, the recording has started. Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining another ARD Community Webcast. Today, we're presenting on DataBuilder for ARD version 2.4. We have Hugh Price on the phone who's going to give the presentation today. I'm going to hand the call over to him in just a second, but I wanted to say if you have any questions as we're going through today's session, you can go ahead and put them in the chat box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and we'll get to them as soon as we have a chance. Likely we'll get to them at the end of the session. And also wanted to let you know that we will be posting a recording of today's session at the end of the session today. I'll post a recording in the ARD community, and any questions that come in, I'll also be posting a transcript of those as well. Okay, so yeah, once again, if you have any questions, just in the chat box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and I'm going to hand the call over to Hugh now. Go ahead, Hugh.
Okay, so just checking you guys can see my screen. That's all good, looking good. All right, so on we go. Melanie, if any problems, if you could just come on and let me know.
Sure.
I'll so otherwise just mute out and I'll carry on. Great. Hello, everyone. Okay, so I'm going to, unusually for me, I'm actually going to do some slides to start with, which is pretty rare, but we'll go for it. But as usual, but then we'll pretty quickly get into some demos as well. So I just kind of need to set the scene a little bit about the sort of history of where DataBuilder's come from and why it exists and where we're going with it, really. And it's really this idea of model-driven test data to drive your DevOps frameworks. You know, there's two things there key in that sentence. One is modeling, which is obviously what ARD is, but we're trying to move modeling in more into the data world. If you think about most testers, fine, they might be doing UI testing or some API testing, but there's a lot of testing of data moving around within systems. So this idea of being able to kind of model the data flows and then build the data to support that model is kind of critical. And the other thing is DevOps, this idea of being able to do stuff in a kind of automated manner, to be able to create stuff that can be deployed out, you know, into Docker containers, etc. Okay, so creating coherent data at speed, whether you're modifying existing systems or creating brand new functionality, having the correct data, test data to drive high quality development is crucial to successful projects, probably stating the obvious there. So introducing DataBuilder, a tool set specifically designed to find and create. So we have built in the capability to find data. It's not just about synthetic data, it's this idea of actually hunting for the right data as well. And if you think about most testers, they would hunt for the data. Typically at the beginning they go and look for the data that matches with the test case, whereas as we build the test case we say, well, what data do you need, and we could then go and find that data for you as part of almost the design of the test case or even the design of the system kind of up front. So we've kind of merged in a lot of the functionality from Agile Requirements Designer with the CA TDM or Test Data Management tool as well. And of course, for those of you familiar with ARD, you know, it's obviously linked in with your Agile Centrals, your ALMs, your JIRAs, your Team Foundation servers, etc. So, you know, it's really trying to kind of glue together your sort of requirements through to code, through to test cases, through to test data, through to release, through to all the usual stuff that you need in a DevOps world. Now, there are several sort of key reasons that DataBuilder exists. You know, I think what's becoming apparent, which you know, again, to not state the obvious, but you know, most development and system testing and testing now is multi-system. You know, it's all very well creating data into a, you know, a single database, but the reality is that, you know, the growth of APIs, everything is traveling through on a data journey. And the idea is that it's almost, you know, here we're looking at some automation which we're pushing in the beginning of a system. We might be, you know, pushing some data through. We might need to create some data directly via through some API data layers into it. We might go off to an external service which we might virtualize. We might run some automation again further on in the journey. And that might be to create some traders or some trades or something like that. We might be creating some flat files. In this case, we might be using flat files to inject into the automation engine. In this case, we're using automation with APIs. We might be making some flat file data, some Swift messages, etc. And all of these things could be considered, you know, the data that is required to bounce through that system. And this is where people spend an awful lot of time, getting the data in the right place at the right time. So having this data journey is sort of critical to the new world order, and I think what we're also finding is that people are moving now much more to a synthetic world. Having the idea of synthetic banks, or having sort of libraries of APIs that you can chain together to create the data to then do your testing is kind of where people are heading. So that is kind of one of the core reasons. There are some very specific test use cases as well, which I'll talk about towards the end of this, but for the moment we'll just kind of stick with that. Anyway, so now I will hop into the tool. Now, so what you have is, let's just sort of close stuff down. Again, if I am disappearing and talking to no one, please someone call me or come and get me. Okay.
No,
so
you're good.
We're good. All right, fine. Thanks. So what we have here now, in the old world of DataMaker, and some of this has been replaced with the portal, but even within the portal, you have the same problem. Now, what I have here is I have I'm trying to create, and this is actually based on a sort of meta version of an actual credit card that exists in the real world. This is how most credit cards are actually set up in most credit card company systems. And you have the idea of customers, card accounts, individual card account holders, risk accounts, and you have all sorts of combinations of data linked together. So you've almost got to think of it like sort of molecules, in terms of I might have a multiple risk accounts, I might have multiple card accounts, I might have one. I might have billing accounts linked to the multiple risk accounts, and it can become, in TDM land, the way we do it was almost like a spreadsheet way of doing it. So you'd have two different card IDs associated with the card accounts, which are then linked to the billing accounts. And you can see here we're kind of using numbers to kind of push that data together. Now, I'm very good at this because I've been doing this for a long time, and for me to create all the different data scenarios, and you can see I've sort of done it down here, I'm sort of creating different combinations of card accounts, individual card accounts. This one's got 2 risks, 2 individual, but do the risks refer to, how do those 1, 2, 3 tables link up to each other? I'd have to go in and actually look at the 1s and the 2s to see how they sort of cross-correlate with each other. So, but the result of that is we are going to do a publish, and we're going to push some data into, a system. We've got some repeaters on it, and, you've got some variables that you're going to, change. Gender, I'm going to change that to male, female, and that's pretty much how you would do it. It's a slightly sort of ad hoc approach. You could put a test data on demand form on the front of it, but you are kind of limited by the parameters that you've set here, and also the how you're going to set repeaters on the publishes, all these sort of, almost got to think of it like a molecule, H2O, 2 hydrogen atoms linking to 1 oxygen atom. So that's the kind of old world. But what we've done now is that you'll now see a new menu option called DataBuilder, and what that will allow you to do is to go in effect to the TDM engine, and you can see here that, for example, we can see those. Some of the stuff I was just looking at there is now available, and I could start manipulating it directly from inside the ARD product. And the idea is that you don't have to really use the TDM tool if you're dealing with generation or to a certain degree finding data as well. Now, firstly, if you take a look at this model on the left-hand side, now this is a model of the different types of credit cards or customer accounts that can occur. So we're actually starting with a customer account, and we just have one singular customer account. And these are all the different potential combinations that can exist for a customer account. Now, the way that we've set it up, and this is the sort of default way, is to think about each table as a separate publish. So here we're publishing an address, which is creating a synthetic address. Here we've got some businesses, card holders, card accounts, billing accounts, etc. Now, but what you'll see is the blue is almost the logic or the model of how these things set together. So if you come in here and look at card holder, let's just open that. What you'll see is we're actually setting some repeaters here. Now those repeaters means that if I travel down this way, I'm going to create 2 cardholders, okay, and so forth. Here I've actually kind of overridden specific values, which is credit and debit, like so. All right. Now I could build my model, and I will show you how I built it in a moment. And I could come in and say, well, I'm interested in a scenario, and I'm going to just drag. You know, this is almost like me building a test case of data or a set of data that I need. I'll just take down to this one. For an addresses, I'm going to choose single or multiple, so I want multiple addresses. And you continue on just as you normally do with almost designing a manual test case, but you're manually designing a data scenario. Now that's fine, but what you should really think about is if I'm going to create a pack of data for my batch system to test, what I'm really interested in is the combinations of them. And that's where the power of the modeling comes in. You know, you can come in here and we could come in and say, now here I've got some scenarios that I've already created. Let's have a look, maybe just pop over to something like here. What I could also do is say, well, just show me all possible. Now there are 192 different possible data combinations here, and as I'm clicking on each one, you can see for the most part what I'm interested in here are the repeaters telling me the different combinations of them. You know, down this route here I'm caring about the different types of cards as well, and that is, you know, the classic part of modeling. So this idea of being able to very quickly build a model of the data I'm interested in and then look at the sort of entire universe, or I could get into using some of our coverage techniques and say, well, if I use all in out edges, that's actually meaning we only need 4 of them to make sure that I'm getting all the different particular combinations. So I'm getting a credit card with a single card, I'm getting a multiple, I'm getting a single, a business, etc., etc. So from 191 down to 4 is pretty good, but that's pretty much how ARD works. Now, if we go back to our scenarios, what you'll see here is that we've in effect gone off and I've actually created 2 different scenarios here. One was BC1, which is just basically just a single one of everything, and this is for a company that has a German offshore account. Okay, so they have an address in Germany, so they're considered a foreign company, and these ones here are just using some optimization techniques. So there's a combination of scenarios and some optimization. Now what I can do now is once I've done that, this is almost showing you the one I've created earlier. I'll show you how I build this up. You will see that we actually create a configuration file, and this is where the DataBuilder engine comes in. It interprets that configuration file, and I'll just export it. And now we're ready to, in effect, run that in a kind of DevOps world. So I could go over here, and we just look at one, say BC1. I could run BC1 dev Hue67.1. I could actually run this in a batch mode, or it could be invoked by, you know, one of the many automation engines to actually just create the data. But we've also, just for ease of use, we've actually gone in and said, well, you can actually run it directly from here. So you could come in here and I could vary the parameters. What I'm actually going to do is say, what environment do I want to run it in? I want to run it into my development environment. That's picked up from the connection profiles in the TDM engine. I'm going to give it a test group ID. I'll come into this in a minute. 1001. How many do I want? 1, and fire this off. Now what's happening now, and this is now in effect running the TDM engine in a batch mode. Now there's a couple of provisos here. One of the key features is that before we actually do the majority of the publishes, you can see the publishes starting to run here, is that we actually populate all the primary key and foreign key values first. Now, I'll just let that run in the background. The reason for this, and you can actually see the values before we actually run, you'll see a new value in here called DataBuilder Keys. And if we just go down, we should see, oops, sprint 1001. So, what's happening here now is for each one of these data scenarios, we're actually storing the keys. So you can see here that For the address, we're actually creating an address, and that's the key value 13392. This is the billing account ID, BAID 4705, and business ID and so forth. We can also store values as we're going. So you can see I've actually said, well, I'm interested in the city. Again, this might come from a random, one of our randLOV functions inside the TDM tool. And actually, as this runs, this will actually probably get a little bit bigger because we can add values as we go. Now, why do you care about these? Firstly, if you're on a data journey, you're almost thinking back to the slide we had before, you need to know what values I'm making here, which are then going to be picked up and moved on to the next one. So if I'm going to, eventually create a Swift message, I need to know the original trader ID that I created through my automation engine or through my data publish or whatever, so that when I create my Swift message, it matches with the trader ID. So the way that we do that is we capture, we don't capture everything. You have to tell it exactly what you're interested in. Mostly it's primary and foreign keys, but you can also supplement it with additional values. And the way that you would do that, the way that you would do that, just popping back over here, is you might want to go in and you'll see, oops, it's probably still running, may as well just kill that. What you'd see over here in DataBuilder, you say launch TDM, and you might want to say, let me just repository connection. So if we come in here and go and look at one of our publishers, I could come in here. Sorry, I'm getting some background noise there. Someone is just doing something. Melanie, are you okay, Melanie?
I'm good.
Yeah,
thanks.
Yeah, fine. So what you'll see there is you could come in here and you could say stored columns for address. Now, what you'll see is down the right-hand side, if you're familiar with the TDM GUI, we've now exposed these directly in here. So I could go into here and just say click on stored columns, and what will happen is you'll pop into a screen, which you may be familiar with if you're familiar with the TDM tool, but I could say I want to store the region, and that's really all you have to do. And the next time you do one of your DataBuilder flows, you would then get that stored. Okay. Now, you'll see here, launch TDM, you'll see all sorts of things that you may well be familiar with in the TDM world. I might want to do something like maintain seed data, and that's going to take me straight into the seed data screen. So, I can add my own seed data, I can add in country codes, etc., etc. But again, you don't have to leave the ARD product. You can do pretty much everything you want from in here. Maybe a few configuration issues you might have to do elsewhere. But most things are here. We've even included our SQL window, so you can actually go off and explore data, which is what I tend to do to start with, is have a look around at the existing data to see what we've got. And here we're just straight into our standard SQL window, etc. So we've got all of the stuff that you would need is sitting there in this, most of that menu option, or you can go down here and then just do a right click like so to get at the stuff you need. Okay, so now let's just go back and think a little bit about these keys. So now what you'll see is that dev sprint, there we go, sprint 101. Great, so we've got all these stored values, that's good. Now what we've introduced is this concept of a test group ID. Now the test group ID is saying basically, and this is pretty much free form, you could link this to your your test lab or your test plans or whatever you want to call it. But the idea is that whenever you run anything, we need to know the environment you're creating the data into and what the test group ID is. So this is the set of data that is going to be used to provision the data for this automation, this set of automation scripts, and we're going to create them with a test group ID, sprint 1001-May the 9th, 2017. Okay, so you can do whatever you like with them, but it allows you to group these sort of these breadcrumbs of what actually is going on in the data as you pass through it based on this group ID. So that's a new concept when it comes to DataBuilder. Now, what I'm going to quickly do is just show you how you do it. Now, there's a few important things to think about here. So I'm just going to, down the right-hand side, I'm just going to create a child level. Let's just call it, business card. Okay, So I'm going to create a new child level. Now, in the old TDM there were some accelerators, but they were a little bit clunky. So what we've now allowed you to do is if you do right click, you can say Accelerator, create one table publish for selected tables. If you remember before, the default is to create each publish as an individual block. So here I'm going to pick address and business. Click OK. Now this is important. What you'll find now is that we've now created a customized list of accelerators, and most of the ones are the sort of default ones associated with the DataBuilder product, but you can also create your own general publish ones here. So you can basically create these lists. You can pick from these lists like so, but more importantly you can actually go in and create your own, because what we tend to find is when you're actually kind of working on your own in your own world, you would find oops, sorry, just go find the correct. So what you'll find in here is DM XML accelerators. You can add your own in here. So if we look at the general publish, then all you really need to do is just take one of the existing ones and create your own list of accelerators. The drop-down list is entirely up to you. The default is entirely up to you, and all of the functions will then be carried through. But if I come in and say, let's just do this one. So for primary and foreign keys, I'm going to use my ETL keys, which is the keys we looked at before. Otherwise, I'm going to allow me to override any values I want, or it would just, if I don't do an override, it's going to pick it randomly from the target. So it's going to go and look in the target and just go pick a random value. Now, I'll take a couple of seconds. Now, just to prove what we've done, if I just come in here and say, let's just do the row 1 editor, right click, you'll see we've created a publish called address. And you can see here that for the primary keys, which was we've actually gone off and we're going to use our ETL test keys, which is our table. I'll talk about that in a minute. The rest of the time we're going to use if address line not equal to empty, and address line 1 we've created as a variable. Otherwise we're going to pick it up from the target. Now the defaults of these are empty. So, but you can see we've very quickly been able to go off and create a pool with the default. Now we've also allowed you at the column level to create your own accelerators as well. So there is another, just contact me if you need this, but there is another way that you can, I mean this is just the two that we have, the two examples, but you can actually add as many as you like here. There's all sorts of different defaults that you can put in there. So if you, in other words, it's automating the automation. If you're trying to actually create, if you just start to do something more than once, then you could actually just pick it as a drop down, and then it would just actually just come through as well. So you can also do a right click on any of the data definitions and override those as well. Now, so we now created a couple of publishes. Now, all I need to do now is just drop those publishes onto the palette. First thing that'll happen is I could come in here and create local variables. I tend to do this by default. And I'm now creating a couple of publishes, create some local variables, like so. Now, what you'll see is we're creating an address and a business. I do need to, there's a little bit of plumbing you need to worry about. So I'm going to add just a process on the top here, which is just going to be, we need a command script to run it. So I'm just going to create a command script. And we also need to link it to a configuration file. So those of you who are familiar with automation, you go to your automation, and it's going to pick up a little DataBuilder config, which is the default. And what I'm going to do now is just add that into my automation framework, and I am good to go. So that's all I need to do. Now, if you look at the address, what you'll see here, let's just go in and have a little look at the address itself. Now, we've added in a new tab, which is the DataBuilder tab. So you'll see this down here, and you'll see some additional stuff. This is the publish that we're dealing with. So this is just actually, if you're familiar with the make concept, we've actually just picked up the publish, which is number 27564, but we've also pulled in some primary keys and join keys here. Now these are basically the relationships that we've picked up from the repository. You could add in some more. So if you want to add in a join, you can come in and you can pick, you know, columns, employer name, parent, transaction, and now what will happen there, that's just a join between the two tables. You'll see a little, does not exist in the current connection. If I click to create, that will then pop up and say, I can create the relationship back in the repository. So as you're working in DataBuilder and you need to add joins, you just add them in here and then you synchronize them back. Okay, so that's very important because as you're creating data, it's the joins that you really care about. You'll see that we've picked up a primary key, which is the address, and then the join keys are basically other columns that then need to link to it. So here I've obviously got a few other ones which are to do with address region, which I don't particularly care about. Oh yes it is, I'm just linking the same region here. I'm going to remove that for the moment, and let's have a look at business, DataBuilder. Here you can see for this one, I'm linking the address ID, the business address ID links to the address ID, which is, now for the most part, if you've got your model correct, these will just come in by, and you don't really need to worry about them, okay? So all I need to do now is just join that up with that. But I might decide I want to override. So if we come in here and we look at DataBuilder, you might find, oh, hold on. All right, your audio connection has been lost. Okay, so hello, hello. Hello, hello. Can you hear me again?
We're back. Yep.
We're back.
Great.
Sorry about that. Not sure what happened there. Not exactly sure I was, but let's go back to. Let's just pop back to here. So, so if we, okay, what I was talking about, hopefully, message sound is gone. What you'll see here is that we've actually got variables. So, for example, region has been declared as a variable inside ARD. So what I could do now is say, well, actually, what I'm going to do is just drop a decision box on here, and we're going to say region, like so. And it's let's just say it's a data interaction, and like so. And what I'm going to do is, if I go down this way, I'm going to say, so I'm just going to call this, let's just call this Canada, and for this I'm just going to call it USA, and this I'm going to call it USA. Fine. Okay, so we've got two of those, and then what I need to do for my test data, you'll see we're going to come in here and we're going to, you'll see all the variables that have been created. So if I come in here and do add region, that's now going to set it to empty. Let's set that to USA, like so. And if you go to here, we're going to do the same thing, existing variable, and we're going to go to region. And in this one, we're just going to go in and set that to CA. Okay. So now we've sort of started to get into this idea of we've got a couple of different journeys through our data. So let's just add those. Select all. And we're starting to do a little bit of modeling on region through like so. Now, what that means is if I come in here, what I first of all I need a couple of, let's just do all possible, store those. And I've got a couple of data journeys. I'm just going to change the name. So that one is, let's just call it ADD-CA, and let's just call this ADD USA. So I've got two different journeys, and then all I really need to do is just say, I'm going to go generate those, and I'm just going to export them, and I can now, so those are in effect available for me to, and what you'll see actually, is if we just go back to our little DataBuilder folder, you will now see that we now have, just sort them, you end up with two files for each one. One is a config and one is a command script. So you can move these around to different machines, obviously. You might want to move them to a Docker container or something like that. But that allows me, like I said before, I could just run it from here. I could just come in here and type ADD CA _DB dev Q67, and that's just going to go off and do a little create me an address with a business, and that's just chuntering away in the background, which is how most people do it. So a part of the idea with, so that's, you see it's creating the addresses, is that once you've actually built the data builder flows, then the idea would be that then you would include them as part of your automation framework. You could also, if you're interested, just run them directly from here if you need the data kind of right now, and that would just run it just like we saw before. Okay, now let's just, I'll just get rid of that one. Let's just open and have a look at this one here. Now this one is slightly different. So what you'll find here is that, again, we've just got our command script. You can see I've been, for multi-business here, I'm going to create multiple businesses, and this is where you're going to have multiple businesses living at a single address. You might have an Inc., a limited, or a holding. And the multi-business, for the test data, all I'm doing is playing with the repeaters here. I'm just adjusting the repeaters. You could, if you wanted to, you could come in and use the data painter functionality if you wanted to put in a random number. So I want to say, you know, something like a random range of, let's go, you know, so let's do range, you know, between 2 and 9. And that means that I'm actually then going to randomly generate different numbers of businesses every time I run it. Okay, so that's one way of doing it, which is interesting. And you'll see here we've got business, and you'll see we've got address. Now, if we double click on the address, what you'll see is that I may well decide I'm just going to create some businesses and I'm just going to attach them to an existing address. So previously we had our joins and actions like so, but what I've also done is I've come in and I've added a find criteria. So what you do is you come in and you want to say I want to find an address. The key I want to link on is the address ID. I want to attach to the block address, and then you add your criteria in, and that's going to pick, you know, in this case, like find an address, and the where clause, you know, would be the region. Just go in and make it a bit bigger, equals USA, for example. So what you're thinking of doing is you're actually saying the criteria that I'm going to make the data with is set to USA, but I could also go off and actually just look up some data. So let's just lose that one. So I've got region equals US, like so. But you'll also see further on down that I'm getting into some more sophisticated logic. So my address types here, I'm actually looking, so here I'm just using address. Oh, all right, okay.
We normally do on a WebEx because of the way that
Hello, I'm back. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it's actually got nothing to do with the WebEx. It's the internet connection to our offices coming in and out. That's what the problem is.
Okay.
So it's that's the problem. So fortunately, I have someone in the other room who keeps coming in. So I apologize for this, but I haven't got much choice at the moment. Anyway, carrying on. So what we've done is we've actually gone through and we've added in additional criteria for address type and address type 2. Now, what does that mean? That means that actually I could go off and hunt for all different, so if we look for all the combinations here, if we go off and let's just create automation. Yeah. Georgina, it's okay. Tom's in the other room, so he's picking up when I'm going out. So you don't need to every time. It's fine. Okay, so if I just come in here and let's just do all possible paths. So what I've got now is let's just create something called automation. So now I've got 12 different combinations, like so. Now what that means is if we go to our test data, you'll see that we've actually got all the different potential combinations of values associated with the different types of address. Okay. Now I could go off now, and in fact I may as well give it a go. I'm actually going to just generate that, and let's just export them, and those are exported, and I'm going to run them, and let's just say where do we want to put them. Dev, let's just call it, let's just do sprint 201, and how many do I want? 1. Now what will happen now is that we will go off and we're going to try and find you the data before we actually go, and so it's going to try and do a business. It's running a bit quickly here, but it'll skip the address. So if it's found an address, then it doesn't need to go and make one. So it's this idea of go find first. If you have the data, let's use it. Otherwise, don't bother. Otherwise, you're going to have to make it. So that, that is quite an important concept when it comes to the provisioning of test data. If possible, reuse the data you've got. Otherwise, don't. We'll go and make it for you. So if we just close that for a minute, and let's go and have a look at our DataBuilder Keys and see what we've got. Sprint 201, I believe it was, something like that. See what's happening. And you can see that for each one of the scripts, we're actually going through and we're actually looking up an existing address ID. So we don't need to go and make an address. We're just actually literally going to find one. So those 13371s, and you can see it's been found. It has a little F next to it, which means it's been found. If it didn't find it, as it's just running through, you'll find that it doesn't have the F next to it. So, but that's a very important concept in terms of being able to go find data, or kind of, as opposed to, it's quite tricky to do that. You have to kind of create a test mark and find it, and then if you can't find it, you've got to create a separate process to do that. So being able to merge that in is actually kind of an important feature of the tool. Okay, just jumping back to make sure I've still got my audio. I do. Brilliant. Let's pop back over here and we keep going. Now, let's just think about some other things here. So let's just look at, I'm just going to open a thing called stock testing. Now, stock testing, this is an example of how you're blending automation scripts now with the idea of data. One of the sort of key advantages of using something like a data builder is that it's going to allow you to provision data not only into databases, into flat files, but it could also provision data into the CA virtualization engine as well. So if we come in here, we'll just open the subflow, and you'll see we've got, these are all in effect direct data publishes to tables. So here I'm going to create a warehouse, I'm going to create some inventories, I'm going to create some transactions and some events. Now this is a subflow, which is classic ARD. The transactions is actually the same subflow. However, for the transactions, I'm coming in from here. I'm starting from here and I'm working my way down. So you can also be quite clever with your subflows. You can say, I need this bit of data, I need that bit of data. You can kind of pick and choose the data that you need, but the model is actually the same model. If we look at this one, city weather, let's just open that one. This one is actually creating a virtual response. Now, the way that we've done that is there's some separate videos on this one, but basically what we've done is we've created an automation tab, and that automation tab actually will create request and response pairs based on the values. Now, the values that we are creating are being passed down coherently. So if I come in here and have a look at the 24 different potential scenarios, you can see we have this is all to do with stocking, creating different patterns of warehouse stock levels in reaction to weather patterns. So if weather patterns, if the prediction is for weather to be good weather, then or bad weather depending on whether you're selling umbrellas or sunglasses, then you need to be able to kind of create the different data scenarios. You could do the same thing with stocks, with different types of drugs, whatever you want really. And you can see we've got different repeaters, and each one of those, these are the 24 different combinations. Now again, if we go to our automation scripts, what you'll see now, it just takes a slightly longer because it's doing a lot of work here, is that as we go through, you'll see your normal DataBuilder stuff, and this in effect would, for each one of these, we would create a different set of warehousing and stock levels. But then matching with them, as we move down, you'll see that we've actually created so here we've got the name, the file name is stock5, default city, request text. So as we move through, let's just look at the response, you'll see we are creating different types of weather in different locations as we're moving through the model. So the result of that is that when we come to create our automation scripts, we are also creating the virtual responses which match with them. Okay, and the information is carried through from the actual makes then into the requests and the responses as well. So that's quite a sort of powerful concept, I think, in terms of being able to kind of tie together. And then the other thing then would be to link it with your Selenium scripts. So you might then decide I want to create some Selenium scripts which are then going to in effect run against the front end. I've populated the back end with some virtual responses and some data. So you're kind of using some pretty combined powerful combinations of data, automation scripts, modeling, test case design, virtualization, all kind of into one. So I'm just going to show you another one. Now there's another one which is, let's just go and find one called ET data. That's an interesting one. Just open that one. Now, this again is quite an interesting one, because what you've done here is that what you will find is that let's have a look at pricing characteristics as well. No pricing, and what's the one we're missing? Sales to local. Let's just open that one. Okay. When you're generating data, especially if you're moving into I guess sort of more business intelligence testing, there are lots of variables. So this publish here, this is actually a dimension table which has an enormous amount of data associated with. There are literally loads and loads and loads and loads of variables that are associated with. You can see there's lots and lots and lots of variables that I could override when I'm creating the data. Okay. Now, when it comes to creating these, what you'll actually find is that you only care about some of them. Now, the sum that you care about, what we've done is we've modeled them. So we've said, well, I care about pricing characteristics. So for pricing characteristics, I come through, there's all sorts of different regional, national, SKUs, combos, direct, calculated. And for data sales orgs, there's different sales districts and groups and directs. And again, all of these are valid combinations. But for the purposes of what I'm interested in, when I go to my data modeling, what you'll see is that as we go through, each one, of course, is a different combination of data. Now, the advantage of this is that I can be quite lazy. I can just focus on the variables that I'm testing today. I don't have to go through every single variable and worry about it. I can just say, I just want one of the regional ones. That's fine for me. What I care about is these sales districts, and those ones I'm going to expand out, and I'm going to build all combinations of them. So we found that for very, very large tables, it's much better to put the groupings of parameters into these subflows. Now, I could, of course, go in and just do the classic like so. Here I've got some specifics. I'm going to do it tomorrow, but let's go and have a look at the data for the sales, and let's look at pricing. Now, what it'll do now is it'll come in and actually say, well, which sales data do I care about? Now, in this case, I'm just caring about regional, and I'm done. And then for the pricing characteristics, I'm going to pick regional. That's fine. and when I come over here, again, I've got different regional and combinations. So I want regional SKU 1, and you see I'm gradually picking the variables I'm interested in, and then I can finish off. So even though I'm thinking of this as a data scenario, what I'm actually doing is I've made it easier for me to just pick the combinations of variables that I care about. I could now store that and call it, let's just call it regional 1. And I can now go off, and I could go off, find my regional 1, and literally just go off, click export. That's good, and I could run it, and oops, I only want regional 1. I just run that one, and let's just run it. What environment do I want? Dev. What group ID do I want? Let's just call it U99. How many do I want? 1. Click on that, and that's going to fire off a specific publish that I've just built. So the alternative is for you to go and do lots of pick list dropping, where I'm picking down variables. I'm literally just picking individual values from like a T-dot form, whereas obviously, and that's just chuntering away, and that's created that one, and that's actually going to create 3 of them. But what we're doing here is just giving you much greater flexibility. So people would just work on their own combinations of variables that they care about, like so, by just playing around with those. It's just chuntering away nicely in the background. Or I could go off and just go in and, as I said, just pick those particular combinations of them. Let's just go and find, and let's just have a look at one which is, this is another good one as well. Now, this is oops, sorry, wrong one. It's the, let me just find, there's another nice example. Give me 1 second. Oh, there we go. So, I've lost it. How annoying. Oh, here we go. Let's try that one. Okay, this is a good one. Now, this is a nice example of what you find. This is actually to do with insurance and cancelling contracts. Now, what you'll tend to find is that when people think about creating data, and this is kind of more focused on something like ETL testing. Now, ETL testing, or extract, transform, load, data testing, or business intelligence test is actually really hard, because you've got to create data in, you might be creating some flat files, which are going to go into Hadoop. You might create some Teradata data directly into that. Now, that is an agreement. That's a contract. Okay. The contract is associated with an agreement, and that's to do with insurance being taken out. And then this is, if it's true, you go down here, and then you start getting into your own little bit of modeling like so. Once they've done that, they then also have the potential to have a failed credit card transactions. You could recover the money or not. Now, that is actually a set of scenarios. If you asked someone to write that down in English, you actually end up with, something that is ambiguous would be a kind description of it. But all you really need to do is to just actually define the data scenarios as you're going along, and then you come into the idea of actually, well, let's just think about all possible, and there are actually 132 potential sets of combinations here, where we've got things data on boundary values, etc. Depending if it's on 30 days if it's a holiday month and a non-holiday month. All of those things are of interest for the testers, and each one of those is actually an individual scenario. Now, once you've done this modeling, to be honest, 132 different data scenarios is not really a problem. It's pretty easy for you to actually set those up. Okay, so you can think about those. Now, the other thing is that you could also then get into what you'll see in here is that you'll actually come into this idea of the expected results. So here you'll see, and I'm kind of bumping into the end of the time here, I'll just finish with this. So in here what you can do is you'll see data maker publishes, you've got find criteria, but you can also add in expected results. So I could actually add in expected results, which would then get carried through using data painter functionality, and that ends up in those set of ETL test keys, those meta tables that we've created. So that means when you run your automation framework, we would be able to pick up the expected results and push them into that. You then have your input keys, and you also have your expected results at the end. So you can actually use the expected results as a specific type of activity here. There's also this idea of a post-process function. Now, a post-process function allows you, what you'll find quite often is that actually, when it comes to, and actually this is the original, this one is a good example of that, is that once you come down to the risk account, you might need to sum up the values of the card accounts in here. And what you can do in there is create post functions. So what I've done is I've created a sum of the card limits in the card accounts. So now, there may be many, many different publishes going on, but what I'm actually doing is I'm summing up that value like so, okay? And that's a post-process function that we've added in there as well. So there are some additional features and bells and whistles in here which make your life easier, and they're all kind of designed to sort of, help with automation, to help this idea of driving a much more automated world where you model it, you build the data at the beginning, you know what your expected results are, you can aggregate your data, and then all of that is kind of joined up by using your DataBuilder Keys, which keeps track of all the various different values that we were looking at before as we go through, and you'd see your expected results in here. Okay, so that's a gentle browse around. I will pop back to the slides now. Hopefully you guys have still been listening to me. You haven't drifted off after the interruptions, but we'll keep going. So once you build an initial model of your required data scenarios, you can quickly advance to auto-generating much more sophisticated sets of combinations of data values. So from a single model, you can guarantee you're hitting all the potential combinations of data, again, given the limits of computing power. And you can see here that I've actually just kind of displayed out the different combinations of repeats that would be stored in the OR combos, like so. This is basically can easily be created using subflows of common invalid data scenarios. When it comes to creating something, if you think about maybe one of the big problems is bad data getting into a system, which means you need to test the validation. Now, to test the validation, you need to generate lots of bad data, which then get put into flat files, which should be rejected. Now, bad data is difficult to create, but the idea with subflows is you could create packs of common types of bad data. So you might have bad Swift codes, you might have high values, high Hebsodic values, high binary values, things with spaces in at the beginning, you can have all sorts of those. But then those become subflows that you can just literally drop onto the palette or the canvas, and that's going to then allow you to attach bad values into your testing, and that's going to then create lots of Swift messages with invalid data, all of which should be rejected. Okay, if data for tests cannot be found, DataBuilder will then create the missing data. Again, that's pretty fundamental to what we're up to. So the automation relies heavily on stable test data. Now, this is kind of an important point. One of the key things with automation frameworks is that they're actually very sensitive to data, and one of the biggest issues with automation failing is not the application itself, but it's actually having the wrong data. And then you get a bug, and you then have to hunt, and actually you find that, oh, we've closed that account, or another automation script used it, and they went on a holiday. Well, they can't go on a holiday if they're already on holiday. So all of those different types of things need to be thought of before you build your automation script. So the way that we're working with customers is to create automation scripts that where the data is not included in the script, it just makes a reference to maybe a CSV, but the data builder would create the script plus the CSV. Now that allows you to regenerate your data at the beginning of the automation script, and that's really important because that allows you to stabilize automation, and it also logically splits the idea of data being prepped for automation at the beginning, automation running in a much more sort of containerized way using your lovely Dockers, etc., and then being able to check it with the actual result. Okay, so we're doing an awful lot of work with this, and job one is to try and extract the data out of the scripts, put them into CSVs, put them into Swift messages, then bring DataBuilder in to kind of populate them, and then obviously to create your SOAP UI, your DevOps, so your any kind of automation scripts that that you normally use. Okay. Now, typical projects where this makes sense. I've obviously talked about end-to-end testing, or sort of, I'm going to say slightly more advanced synthetic data generation scenarios where you're creating data into 2 to 3 to 4 systems at the same time. I think probably maybe 4 to 5 systems in one go is a good way to test it, because you're testing like the componentization. You could be testing maybe 20 systems end to end, but this idea of being able to link 4 or 5 of them together to start with, and then test those, and then maybe pick up 2 at the end and then move forward from that point forward, is a very structured way of being able to kind of test in a much more organized way. So that's kind of one of the core uses. I would say big data testing or BI testing or ETL testing is very well suited for DataBuilder. Migration testing, how many people currently are working on a migration of one system to another? Now, migrations actually are rely on upstream data. So what you should think about doing is actually generating the data more thoroughly to test your part of the migration. Most migrations are, get it off the mainframe, get rid of EBSTIC values, convert it into CSVs, once the CSVs match the account numbers. If the account numbers don't match, then create new accounts, and it's usually a 5 to 6 step process. Each one of those can be tested much more thoroughly, so when you join them together, it's much more structured. EDI file processing, so if you think about HIPAA, SWIFT files, then again, what you're really looking for is the combinations of cross-currency, cross-accounting boundaries, accounts existing, accounts not existing, and also being able to use something like virtualization so that when an EDI file is processing, you don't have to worry that all of the sys data is in the right place, because you've actually created matching virtual responses for, maybe some of the initial stuff before you get to the system you're really trying to test. And then again, time-shifted data is quite good, because, the reality is that if you're copying any kind of production data or using even data in your own systems, you've got to keep it up to date. And obviously, once you move towards a more synthetic approach, it's much easier to create data, for tomorrow, for today, etc. Okay, so that's basically DataBuilder. Apologies for the problems with the audio. I hope you can just skip over that in the recording. So simple to use test data generation, data modeling. For those of you who are seriously into data generation, you should take a look at this, because it does allow you to solve the one-to-many to many-to-one problem, because it's much easier to define that with a model than it is to fiddle around with lots of different repeaters and kind of prior lookups, etc. And it's using this idea of data modeling and data generation, putting them together, and it's really designed to help you drive that continuous development and that CI, CD, DevOps frameworks. Okay, so let's see if we've got any questions, and let's have a look. Let's have a look. Sorry, can't quite see. Okay. Okay, so we have no questions at the moment. So let's see. Let's just have a look at our attendees. Okay, so Melanie, are we good to wrap it up now, do you think?
Yeah, Hugh, if you just want to pass me the ball really quickly. I did mention in the event itself and in some of the announcements that this session does qualify you for 1 professional development unit credit. So the code is here. This will be good for 1 year from the original webcast date, so that's April 25th. So take that down now, and you can use that as a credit moving forward. Other than that, thank you everyone so much for joining. Thank you, Hugh, for presenting today. It was a great presentation. Despite some of the issues, we'll work that out for next time. And if you have any questions that you think of later, you can always feel free to enter a question into the ARD community. You can leave a comment on the webcast recap that I'll post later today with the recording and the slides and everything, or you can feel free to reach out to any of us. We're happy to help you in any way possible. Thank you everyone so much for joining, and we'll see you out in the community.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.